Right now, your jaw is likely locked, your teeth pressed tightly together, as your mind builds an invisible maze out of tomorrow. You are lying in the dark, but you are not actually in your room. You are miles ahead, pre-thinking every hard conversation, calculating every potential disaster, and mentally defending yourself against changes that haven't even occurred yet. This is the dry-mouthed insomnia of hyper-vigilance, that sharp, interior ache that comes from trying to solidify the future before it can catch you by surprise. Your chest feels rigid, compressed by a list of what if that loop endlessly through your thoughts, whispering that if you dare to drop your guard for even 1 hour, everything will shatter. You are treating tomorrow like an incoming storm, and your spirit is entirely worn raw from standing at the gates, trying to hold back the wind. The air around your bed is cool, carrying the faint, crisp scent of split slate and old cedar wood, as if a mountain breeze has drifted down from the high peaks. Outside, the night has settled into a deep, heavy violet, and the window panes feel cold to the touch, matching the slow cooling of the earth after a long day. There are no bright notifications here to fuel your alarm, no schedules to satisfy, and no voices demanding that you explain how you will survive the next year. The shadows on your ceiling do not panic. They simply rest against the plaster, like dark water filling a basin, moving only when the trees outside bow slightly to the dark air. In this quiet, immediate space, you are completely released from the world's calculations. If it feels right, take a slow breath into the very lower frontier of your ribs, letting the air widen your belly without trying to make your posture perfect. There is no need to force anything, to shift in your mind right now. And you do not have to convince yourself that you are perfectly brave. What you are experiencing in this heavy midnight hour is not failure. This deep, exhausting need to control the unwritten days is not a sign that you are broken or uniquely fragile. It is simply the natural friction of a mind that has been trying to weave a heavy iron net over a wild river, straining to keep the banks from shifting during the spring melt. Tonight we will not force the mind to be silent, because an anxious mind cannot be quieted by a command to stop thinking. We are simply going to let the iron net drop into the mud. There is a beautiful, striking paradox at the heart of your anxiety, one that ancient Buddhist insight offers like a cool stone placed on a feverish forehead. The torment of future worry does not happen because tomorrow is actually a dangerous block of granite waiting to crush you. It happens because you have fallen for the illusion that safety can be manufactured by freezing reality in place. We look at the absolute fluidity of life, the changing seasons, the shifting health, the unpredictable movements of others, and we mistake that fluidity for a threat. But the wisdom of the elders reminds us that the future is not a solid object we can carve through worry. It is a continuous, changing stream of conditions. Trying to pre-think every outcome is like trying to weave an iron mesh tight enough to capture the fog. It is a profound misuse of your present strength. Dear friend, right now, maybe you have felt this too, the immense bleeding fatigue that comes from holding a heavy wire net over a current that never stops moving. We spend our days and our nights tightening the mesh, pulling the iron wire until our palms are raw, believing that if we just make our calculations rigid enough, the river of life will stop changing its shape. When we do this, our energy becomes stiff, brittle, and easily broken by the slightest tremor. We lose the soft, adaptive power of our true nature, because we are too busy trying to force tomorrow to match our blueprint. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You do not have to find your ultimate security before the sun rises over the dark ridges. You are safe enough to soften right now. Nothing is required of you now. Absolutely nothing. The stone cliffs outside do not apologize for letting their loose shale slip into the gorge. The old trees do not feel shame, because they cannot predict which way the winter gales will blow their leaves. Your spirit is allowed to have its unwritten spaces, its unmapped valleys, and its long periods of quiet waiting where no outcomes are certain. Your safety is not a structure you must build out of heavy stone before your youth fades. It is the capacity of your awareness to float upon the water, completely unattached to the shore. Slowly, the noise of your anticipated obligations begins to fade as we lift our awareness away from the digital calendars and the mental scenarios that have held you hostage. Imagine yourself standing at twilight near the mouth of a steep mountain gorge during the sharp turn of autumn. The air here is damp and cold, thick, with the smell of wet earth, crushed fern, and the heavy spray of rapids crashing against the rocks below. The ground beneath your sandals is rough with fractured slate, and the light is a fading, watery charcoal that turns the high peaks into dark, jagged silhouettes against the sky. A few paces away, leaning against a low stone wall near a pile of unworked slate blocks, is an old stonemason named Master Taizan. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace, his leather-skinned hands rough from decades of split stone, yet his face is entirely unlined by worry. He does not carry a rule. He does not have a plan drawn on parchment. And he does not look up at the high cliffs with fear, even though the loose shale occasionally rattles down the slope. In the wind, he simply sits by his quiet hearth, watching the grey smoke rise into the violet air, waiting to see if you are ready to drop your heavy iron wire and look at the river that has been running through your life since the beginning. As you step closer to his shelter, the wet gravel crunches softly beneath your feet, grounding you in the damp reality of this specific valley. Taizan does not give you an abstract lecture on peace, or tell you that tomorrow will be perfectly safe. Instead, he reaches into the dark water of a stone trough at his side and pulls out a single piece of raw, unpeeled willow wood that has been soaking in the current for days. This is where we begin to see what your hyper-vigilance has done to your internal structure, and what we must learn to release before the deep, healing sleep can find you. The twilight deepened over the quarry cottage, casting long, angular shadows across the heaps of fractured slate. Master Taizan turned the wet willow branch in his hands, his skin rough against the unpeeled bark, the moisture from the stone trough glistening on his knuckles. He looked up at the high cliff line that pressed down against the small roof of the dwelling, then directed his gaze toward the narrow footpath where the mountain trail dissolved into the grey mist of the lower gorge. In the village just below this ridge, Taizan began to speak, his voice unhurried, matching the deep, rhythmic murmur of the rapids below. There lived a young stonemason named Koi. He had inherited his family's small wooden home, built directly beneath a sheer, jagged rock face that dropped loose shale and small pebbles whenever the spring rains softened the mountain soil. It was a modest, beautiful spot, surrounded by wild ferns and the constant, musical rushing of the creek. But a deep, paralyzing terror had taken hold of Koji's chest. Every evening, as he sat by his window. He would look up at the dark, overhanging cliff and listen for the slightest rattle of gravel. He became convinced that a catastrophic slide was inevitable, that a massive boulder would eventually break loose in the night and crush everything he loved while he slept. The uncertainty of the mountain's timeline turned into a constant, burning fever in his mind. He stopped carving the fine stone basins and delicate oil lamps that the villagers loved, believing he had no time for beauty when disaster was hovering right above his roof. Driven by a desperate compulsion to secure his future against surprise, Koi decided he must build an absolute barrier between his home and the sky. He spent his days in the quarry, splitting the heaviest, thickest blocks of dark slate he could find. He dragged these massive timbers of stone back to his cottage, his back aching, and his fingers split from the sharp edges of the rock. He began to construct a colossal, overbearing stone canopy directly over his front lintel, reinforcing the roof beams with heavy iron brackets and layering thick slabs of slate across the entire entranceway. A suffocating vigilance consumed his life. He could not sleep because he was constantly calculating the load-bearing capacity of his pillars, wondering if he needed to add another row of stone, or if the brackets would hold if a tremor struck during the winter freeze. He was building an ironclad fortress, but the more protection he added, the more terrified he became. The massive canopy grew so heavy that the ancient cedar pillars of his house began to groan under the unnatural stress. The walls of his cottage warped. The door frame became jammed, and the very structure he had built to keep himself safe was now bowing downward, threatening to collapse under its own immense weight. He was working himself to the bone to survive an imaginary landslide, while the immediate roof above his head was ready to splinter. One evening, as a cold autumn rain began to slick the slate blocks, Koi stood in his doorway, his hands raw and bleeding from handling the iron ties. He was completely paralyzed by fatigue. His chest felt tight, filled with a dry, vibrating panic that made his teeth ache. He had given up his trade, his peace, and his rest to pre-think and prevent a disaster that had not yet arrived, and his reward was a house that was breaking under the weight of his own fear. It was then that Master Taizan walked down the slippery mountain path, carrying a small iron mallet used for testing the density of rock. He did not scold Koi for the monstrous, misshapen canopy, nor did he tell him that the cliff above was perfectly safe. Instead, he walked right up to the entrance, reached out, and tapped his iron mallet against the primary cedar lintel beam that spanned the doorway. "Listen to the sound within this timber, Koi," Taizan murmured, his eyes tracking a long, deep hairline crack that had begun to split the wood from the center outward. "Tell me what the wood is doing." Koi leaned his head close to the creaking beam, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The ancient cedar did not give off the deep, solid hum of a healthy structure. It emitted a faint, high-pitched, screeching sound, a slow, continuous cracking as the grain was forced to bear, a weight it was never grown to support, dust settling into his hair. "The beam is splitting under the load," Koi said, his voice dropping into a hollow whisper. "It is trying to carry a mountain of stone that doesn't belong on top of a wooden house. It is breaking itself because I wanted to make the roof thick enough to stop the sky from falling." Taizan lowered his mallet, his gaze gentle but piercing. "You have spent the entire season trying to live in a future that hasn't happened yet. the old man said softly. You have turned your own home into a trap because you were terrified of being caught unprepared by the wind. But this house does not fail because the mountain is cruel. It fails because your protection has become heavier than the threat. You have turned your own mind into a rigid iron net, trying to freeze the shifting shale. And now you are suffocating beneath the weight of your own ropes. Koi looked from the cracked cedar beam down to his own raw, calloused palms, and then out at the dark unwritten gorge that was filling with the evening mist. In that quiet, freezing moment, as the rain dripped from the edges of the heavy slate canopy, a profound wave of emotional recognition washed through his spirit. He saw that his true torment was not the unpredictable cliff or the loose shale. It was born from the exhausting, daily act of trying to build an absolute structure out of tomorrow's air. He had turned his own mind into a heavy monument of fear, and he was being crushed by the very bricks he had laid down to save himself. As you lie here in the safety of your dark room, let that image of the overloaded lintel beam rest in your awareness. Notice how it fractures when it is forced to hold a weight that belongs to an imaginary day. You do not need to reinforce your pillars tonight, and you do not need to figure out how to prop up the sky before the morning comes. You can simply allow the heavy slate to slip from your hands, letting the rigid architecture of your worry drop away into the cold, quiet earth. The cold autumn rain continues to slide down the dark face of the gorge, washing over the broken fragments of stone until the whole valley smells of wet iron and damp moss. As we rest with the echo of Koji's groaning cedar beams, this image begins to press softly against the out edges of your own hidden midnight exhaustion. This ancient story is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold and indifferent to the real challenges that tomorrow might bring to your door. It is not an invitation to live without a roof, to abandon your practical responsibilities, or to face the changes of life with a blank, unfeeling mind. Instead, it is showing us something much quieter, a profound change in our internal climate that allows our natural strength to return to its deep, unforced fluidity. When we look directly into the center of our nighttime panic, we find that the suffering we carry was not born solely from the fact that life is unpredictable. The deepest ache was created by the specific way the mind held what happened. In the language of the awakened heart, what we often describe as attachment is not a beautiful expression of care or responsibility. Attachment is that dry, tight clenching in your chest that says, if I cannot guarantee exactly how tomorrow will land, I am completely unprotected, I am helpless, and I am a failure. It is the desperate grip that turns our natural desire for safety into a rigid, suffocating iron net that cuts our own palms, while the river of time flows completely undisturbed beneath our ropes. We call this craving, not a hunger for physical luxury, but a desperate, exhausting thirst for certainty before we allow ourselves to take a single breath of rest. When you spend your night mentally rebuilding your schedule, practicing your defenses, and trying to pre-think every potential crisis, you are dragging a mountain of heavy slate onto the fragile roof of your present moment. You are loading your lintel beam with stones that belong to a day that does not yet exist. One of the greatest insights of ancient wisdom is that we cannot always control the first pain, the sudden shifting of the shale, the unpredictable actions of others, or the natural thaws and freezes of our lives. But we can learn to stop adding a second wound to the first. The second wound is the one we inflict on ourselves when we refuse to let the future remain unwritten, turning our present awareness into a fortress that smothers our own spirit. True mindfulness, when translated into the immediate language of your tired heart tonight, is simply the newly discovered ability to observe a frightening scenario without immediately treating it as an absolute truth. It is the capacity to notice that your mind is spinning a narrative about tomorrow's disaster, and to watch that thought happen without letting it load a single stone onto your shoulders. You can acknowledge the potential storm without choosing to lock your body into a state of permanent impact. When you practice this, you begin to cultivate an inner surface that resembles the open valley floor rather than the rigid canopy. You become spacious. You allow the changes of life to approach. You meet them with immense grace, but you do not allow their anticipation to splinter the cedar beams of your sanity. This brings us to the gentle, unburdened truth of impermanence. No season freezes the river forever, and that includes the difficult, shifting terrain you have been trying to navigate lately. Your uncertainty, your fear of loss, your feeling of being exposed, these are not permanent verdicts on your life. They are simply temporary weather moving over your coordinates. The future will arrive according to its own natural geometry, shaped by 1,000 currents. You can neither predict nor prevent from your bed. Letting go does not mean you drop your tools or stop caring about your survival. It simply means you release the extra, unrequired struggle of trying to make a changing world. Stay completely still. You drop the illusion that you can protect your house by building a ceiling so heavy it breaks your own walls. Awareness is the wide, quiet space of this mountain gorge that can hold both the solid cliff and the rushing water without taking sides. It is the part of you that is listening to this voice right now, the steady, untouched observer that remains completely free from the calculations of the horizontal world. You are not the architect of the storm. You are not the guardian who must stay awake until dawn to prevent the sky from falling. You are the deep space itself, which knows how to let the water pass without once doubting its own capacity to survive the flow. When we touch this space, true compassion finally becomes an intimate reality. Compassion is not a soft sentiment. It is the immense, immovable courage to let your tomorrow remain unshaped without turning that emptiness into a reason to panic. But the young stonemason had not yet discovered how to stay whole. When the structures of his mind were dismantled, just as it may still be difficult for you to soften, while your obligations feel so loud and immediate. It is easy to understand the wisdom when the room is dark and the world is asleep, but the true transformation happens when we learn how to hold our emptiness, when the frost begins to harden the trail. As our boat of awareness drifts further into the violet shadows of the night, let these reflections bring you closer to the immediate reality of your own body. You have spent so much time living in the imaginary territory of your next week, defending a house miles away, that your own skin has felt like an unfamiliar shelter. Now let this clarity come home, moving down past the thoughts and the calculations, directly into the heavy, quiet truth of your breath and the bed where you rest. If it feels right, let your awareness gently slide down from the horizontal world of upcoming schedules and unwritten plans, settling directly into the immediate, physical chamber of your chest. There is absolutely no need to force your breathing, to slow down by an act of will, or to demand that your body achieve a state of perfect porcelain stillness right now. Instead, You might simply observe the unforced, natural weight of your breath as it fills the back of your lungs, widening your ribs slightly against the surface beneath you. Notice how each inhalation arrives with a subtle, cool spaciousness, like mountain air, passing over damp moss, and how each exhalation carries away a tiny fraction of the heat your nervous systems has stored throughout the day. Even noticing this single shift is entirely enough. Perhaps you can locate the specific places where your body is surrendering its weight to the fabric of the bed. Feel the heavy, dense curve of your shoulders sinking down, the flat expanses of your thighs relaxing, and the back of your head resting fully in its place. As you follow the rhythm of your chest, see if you can invite the very small muscles around your jaw to unlatch. There is an ancient, tight guarding we hold there, a subtle clenching of the teeth that comes from constantly trying to outrun our own lives, trying to brace ourselves against the feeling of being caught by surprise tomorrow. Let that armor drop. Allow the skin across your forehead to become smooth and soft, like the surface of a dark pool when the evening wind completely dies away. Now, without any trace of frustration or self-judgment, notice one specific scenario or obligation that has been persistently asking for your attention tonight. It might be the remembered shadow of a task left undone, the heavy anxiety of an upcoming change you feel unprepared for, or that low-grade alarm that whispers, you must pre-think every detail of next week to keep your life from shattering. Do not try to push this mental visitor out of the room, and do not try to use your willpower to crush it. If we fight our worries, we are merely applying more pressure to our internal pillars, causing the cracks in our spirit to widen. Instead, just let this thought be seen exactly as it is, holding it with a quiet, spacious permission. Imagine that you are holding that heavy, unshaped slate block that Koi carried down from the quarry. Feel the rough, dusty texture of its edges, and notice the cold weight of it, pressing into your palms, straining your wrists under its mass. In your mind's eye, see yourself taking this current worry, this frantic need to control tomorrow, and placing it gently into the stone itself, letting the slab absorb the exact shape of your alarm. Watch the liquid of that anxiety seep into the micro cracks of the dark shale, filling the stone until it holds the absolute weight of your anticipation. Notice what happens as you hold this image in your imagination. You do not need to lift the stone above your head, and you do not need to build a canopy out of it. You are simply the observer, looking directly at the heavy block without allowing its mass to crush your present house. The anticipation belongs to the unwritten calendar. The stone belongs to the mountain. You are simply the space that allows both to exist. You are letting the frantic energy rest inside the shale without letting it splinter your own bones. Now, if it feels right, imagine leaning down and rolling that slate block into a deep, dark canyon where a wild river runs over ancient sand. Let your fingers slowly release their grip on its sides, allowing your hands to open wide in your bed, palms facing upward toward the ceiling. Watch what happens in the darkness of your mind when you stop trying to balance this weight on your roof. The stone drops through the cold mountain water, settling softly into the deep, dark sand at the bottom of the rapids, where the current immediately begins to wash over its sharp edges. Watch the image change as the valley fills with a thick, protective mountain fog. The sharp lines of the slate lose their definition in the grey mist. The worry becomes smaller, turning into a faint shadow then into a quiet whisper, until it merges completely with the vast uniform stillness of the riverbed. The water is wide enough to hold 1,000 heavy blocks without its own deep current being broken. You do not need to watch the stone vanish completely. You can return to the heavy, grounding safety of your own breath whenever you are ready. There is an immense, unburdened freedom in allowing yourself to realize that your life does not have to be a fortress built against the sky. Tonight, your only assignment is to let your stream find its own natural level, undisturbed by the storms that may or may not arrive next month. You do not need to heal your entire future before the sun rises, and you do not have to force a sudden emotional breakthrough. Simply resting your attention on the unhurried edge of your own skin is a profound form of wisdom. You are drawing your energy back from the horizontal world, allowing the internal current of your spirit to pool in your chest, soft, dark, and perfectly valid in its own quiet space. But the old stonemason has not finished his work in the gorge, and the young builder's transformation had a much deeper layer to reveal when the winter frost finally locked the mountainside in ice. In a moment, this journey will take us into a season of deep darkness, where we will discover how a green branch can survive without building a single wall. For now, let your ribs expand into the cool, dark room, feeling the absolute luxury of being completely unmapped by anyone, anywhere, for the rest of this night. The darkness thickened until the jagged granite peaks above the quarry were swallowed entirely by the velvet sky, leaving only the sound of the freezing mountain wind rattling through the dry ferns. Master. Tyson adjusted his heavy canvas cloak, his eyes reflecting the soft, faint grey of the frozen mist that hung over the rapids. He gestured toward the lower gorge, where the river dipped into a deep, jagged cleft that never saw the noon sun. When the winter finally locked the province in ice, Tyson continued, his words falling slowly into the cold night air. A sudden, violent freeze struck the mountain slope. The temperature dropped so fast that the water, trapped within the crevices of the cliff, expanded overnight, causing massive chunks of slate to crack and groan like thunder. Across the valley, the villagers hunkered down by their fires, accepting the shifts of the mountain, while Koi sat awake in his newly cleared cottage, his body rigid, his heart pounding against his ribs at every sound from the ridge. This was a much harsher blow than the simple anxiety of autumn. The actual threat of physical danger arrived at his door, accompanied by a profound, suffocating sense of helplessness. He felt as though his decision to take down the heavy stone canopy had left him entirely naked to the malice of the elements. He spent 3 days sitting on the cold timber floor, his hands tucked into his sleeves, his mind trapped in a fierce, looping nightmare of anticipation. He replayed every sound of cracking stone, trying to predict the exact path of the next falling boulder, until his own thoughts felt like shards of sharp glass cutting his throat from within. He was convinced that his inability to control the mountain's movement made his entire existence unsafe. On the 4th morning, a faint knock sounded against his wooden door frame. It was not a neighbor bringing warning, nor was it an elder coming to offer a plan. It was Master Tyson, holding an old leather pouch and a single, unpeeled green willow whip that he had cut from the riverbank down below. A slender branch, frozen stiff on the outside, but still carrying the supple juice of the valley floor in its core. The old stonemason did not offer a word of pity, nor did he tell Koi that the cliff would remain silent. Instead, he pointed his staff toward the deepest, coldest part of the river gorge, a spot where the spray from the rapids turned into thick sheets of hanging ice against the black granite. "Come, Koi," Tazan said simply. "We must go down to the water before the hard freeze sets the trail in iron." Koi followed the old man down the treacherous, slippery path, his knees trembling from days of fasting and hyper-vigilance. The air down here was thick with frozen spray, smelling faintly of cold iron, wet shale, and old mountain mud. Koi looked at the slender willow whip in Tazan's hand, his voice tightening with a raw, desperate frustration. "Why do we look at branches, Master? The mountain is breaking apart. Above my roof, if my heavy slate beams could not withstand the pressure of this frost without splitting, how can a soft reed survive? Everything is shattering because nothing is strong enough to freeze the cliff in place." Tazan stopped beside an ancient, thick cedar tree whose primary branch had just snapped under the weight of the accumulated ice. Hanging by a few shredded fibers of bark, he knelt down by the churning water, reached out, and held the frozen willow whip directly in the path of the fast-moving rapids, allowing the heavy current to wash over the wood. "Look at how the whip meets the river, Koi," the old man instructed. "Tell me what the wood is doing." Koi leaned down, the freezing spray stinging his eyes. The willow did not stand, rigid against the weight of the ice or the force of the current. It bowed its head completely into the rushing rapids, its tip curving smoothly with the shape of the water, allowing the fast-moving stream to dissolve the frost from its skin before it could harden into a fracture. "It yields," Koi whispered, a cold drop of moisture falling from his chin. "It does not try to hold the ice up. It lets the river take its weight, so the cold cannot snap it." Tazan lifted the branch, its bark wet and glistening, perfectly unbroken. "This willow carries a peculiar nature, Koi," the old man said, his voice dropping into the deep silence of the gorge. "If you try to make it stand like an oak in a blizzard, it will splinter within an hour. The strength of this wood does not live in its hardness. It lives in its capacity to change its shape to match the movement of the winter. Your heavy stone canopy failed because you were trying to make a wooden house harder than the mountain. You have been treating every fearful thought as an absolute command to build a wall. But true protection is not a barrier. It is the willingness to bend with the unwritten current without breaking your root." Koi stood frozen under the shadow of the weeping ice sheets, the wind whipping his robes against his shins. He looked down at the dark, churning water where the willow had just danced. He did not experience a magical, sudden erasure of the winter, and the cracking cliffs above his home did not miraculously turn to solid glass. The reality of his difficult, unpredictable environment remained exactly as it was: cold, uncertain, and demanding. But as he stared into the rapids, he made one small, subtle shift. Within his own chest, he took a long, slow breath of the freezing air, feeling the icy expansion in his lungs, and he stopped the habit of treating his anxious anticipation as the truth of the moment. He recognized that his long winter, his vulnerability, and his unwritten days were not a disaster to be prevented, but the precise current his unique spirit required to discover its own supple resilience. He stopped trying to be a stone fortress. With his fingers still red from the frost, Koi reached down, took the leather pouch from Tazan, and helped the old man gather the small pieces of driftwood that had been polished smooth by the rapids, moving with a slow, disciplined precision. He was no longer bracing for the impact of tomorrow. He was inhabiting the immediate wetness of the stones. He was choosing to sit with the uncertainty of the mountain, forgiving his house for being vulnerable without pretending the fear did not exist. He returned his attention completely to the sound of the water beneath his boots, releasing his frantic grip on the horizon. As you rest in the safety of your dark room tonight, let that image of the yielding willow branch settle into the deep soil of your own heart. Notice how it does not fight the current, and how it does not apologize for its soft, slender form. You do not need to build a stone barrier before the sun rises, and you do not need to prove your strength by outthinking the wind. You can allow the winter of your life to be exactly as fluid as it is, trusting that the capacity to adapt is already woven into the very fiber of your being. The silent, unmoving air of your bedroom holds you in a deep cradle of shadow now, as if the dark itself is inviting you to drop the remaining weapons you have been using against your own history. In the quiet expanse left by the story of the willow, in the gorge we can begin to untangle the intricate, heavy knots that keep your mind racing while the clock moves steadily toward morning. It is not the external fact of life's unpredictability that drains your spirit. It is the secondary world of mental friction you build around that uncertainty. We spend our nights constructing elaborate courts of judgment within our own thoughts, trying desperately to rehearse the future and replay the past, operating under the exhausting belief that if we can just scold ourselves enough, we will somehow force our lives to become perfectly secure. When you lie awake, measuring every potential threat and trying to pre-think every disaster, you are engaging in a silent, punishing resistance to reality. You are telling the current moment that it is fundamentally forbidden to contain darkness or open questions. This constant, desperate craving for control turns our inner evaluation into an insatiable phantom. We look at the smooth paths of others, and we allow their apparent stability to become an indictment of our own vulnerability. We try to fix our exhaustion through shame, whispering that our fear is a failure of character, until we have turned our temporary winter into a permanent identity. We stop being a human being who is navigating an unwritten season, and we become the guarded one, the fragile soul, the person who is always bracing for impact on the cold ridge. This is where the ancient, clear-sighted psychology of the Buddha offers a profound doorway out of our self-made prison, speaking in a language that understands the immediate ache of your heart tonight. The teachings show us that every human life is touched by two distinct forms of discomfort. The first pain is simply what life brings: the sudden, unseasonal freeze, the loosening shale on the high cliff, the real financial shift, or the simple neutral fact that certain answers take a long time to emerge. This first pain is clean. It is the raw, unedited landscape of a world we do not control. It contains no cruelty and no personal verdict. It is simply the weather of existence. The second pain, however, is entirely what the mind throws over that landscape. The second pain is the bitter layer of self-condemnation, anxiety, and comparison that we pour into our own wounds. It is the voice that insists your vulnerability is a defect, and that you must mutilate your own nature to build an iron canopy out of tomorrow's worries. We cannot always stop the first pain. We cannot force the mountain to alter its geological thaws, nor can we prevent the arrival of a difficult winter, but we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the second pain. We can stop throwing our own internal life force into a frantic, artificial net that is split against its grain. True peace, when met in the deep darkness of this room, is never the complete eradication of difficulty. It is not a pristine, imaginary cottage where no stones fall and every path is laid out in perfect brick. Peace is simply a fundamentally altered relationship with that difficulty. It means looking at the dark, cold, uncertainty of your current life and choosing to meet it the way the green willow whip meets the fast rapids. It means letting the shadow be exactly as deep as it is, without converting that darkness into a reason to hate your own progress. When you allow your unique season to unfold, without the added torment of trying to freeze time, the exhaustion in your nerves begins to drop away like loose gravel falling from a cliff. Have you ever wondered what happens when you simply grant your life permission to be unmapped? What happens when you drop the requirement to build an ironclad answer? Before this week ends, the universe does not collapse when you step out of the horizontal race of pre-thinking every disaster. It simply continues its ancient, unhurried expansion without your panic. Your drive to constantly monitor the horizon is not proof of preparation. It is merely a fearful attempt to protect yourself from the deep vulnerability of being a human being in a changing world. As we allow these truths to sink through the layers of your exhaustion, the sharp, frantic quality of your thoughts begins to lose its grip. You are not required to love the freeze, and you do not need to pretend that your uncertainty feels pleasant. It is simply the current texture of your ground. In a moment, we will look at how this ancient clarity shows up in the small, mundane frictions of your next morning. But for right now, let your spine sink heavily into the mattress, feeling the immense relief of knowing that you do not have to be an immovable rock fortress to be whole. You are allowed to be the branch that bows to the flow. Now let this ancient clarity step down from the mountain gorge and enter the concrete, noisy spaces of your modern daily life, moving out of the frozen rapids and directly into the small, fragmented moments that test your spirit between sunrise and dusk. True inner alignment is not something we save for a quiet walk near a quarry. It is practiced in the very ordinary, friction-filled intervals of your routine. It is found in that brief, suspended second before you unlock your phone to check for a reassurance text that hasn't arrived, or when you are sitting at your kitchen table late at night, staring at a list of expenses, trying to maintain a brave face while feeling an immense, cold heaviness inside your stomach. Think of how many times a day your internal pillars begin to groan and splinter because you are tracking the visible stability of people on a screen, or because you are trying to manage the unexpressed moods of a partner, a friend, or an employer. We spend our precious hours replaying an accidental mistake we made during a brief afternoon meeting, or comparing our vulnerable, hidden journey with the polished, solid arrivals of those who seem to move through life without a single landslide. We carry a constant, phantom guilt that tells us we are permanently lagging behind, that our exposure is a proof of deficiency, and that any hour we spend resting must somehow be paid for through a prior state of complete emotional collapse. But look at what happens when you bring the memory of the slender, green willow whip into these small, vibrating moments of your afternoon. You begin to realize that a single breath taken before you respond to an aggressive demand is not just a pause. It is a profound form of personal wisdom. It is the moment you step out of the heavy stone fortress. You are choosing to care deeply about your world without gripping its outcome so tightly that you tear your own skin. You can offer your love to a person or your dedication to a project without allowing the frantic speed of the market to dictate the rhythm of your heart. Not every urgent thought that crosses your mind deserves your blind obedience, and not every heavy feeling you experience is a command to go out and repair your entire destiny. When your mind whispers that you are failing because someone else has achieved their perfect structure early, you can treat that thought like water, striking the willow bark. Let it exist. Let it be cold. Let it be exactly what it is. But let it flow past your center and drop down into the river without altering the deep, natural root of your life. You do not have to build a monument of slate around every worry that flies your way. You can want rest without needing to justify its necessity to anyone, including your own internal critic. You do not need to wait until your body breaks or your mind goes completely numb before you are permitted to set down the heavy stone tools. Rest is not a luxury you earn by matching the hardness of the cliff face. It is the natural, quiet ground that allows your unique nature to survive the winter freeze. When you step back from the urge to protect yourself against every future tremor, you are not abandoning your safety. You are simply ensuring that there will be a living, supple center left beneath the frost to bow and dance when the real current arrives. Tomorrow, when the alerts flash, or when you feel the old impulse to check your position against the world's clock, remember that your life is allowed to be unwritten. You can look at the rigid fortifications across the valley with immense kindness. You can celebrate their stability, but you do not need to freeze your own river to match their layout. You can establish a clear, quiet boundary within yourself that says, they are standing like ancient cedars, but I am learning the strength that knows how to bend. Slowly, the noise of your anticipated obligations begins to fade, drawing you further away from the demands of the horizontal world. The small details of your day, the unanswered messages, the complex goals, the fears about whether you will ever be enough are all losing their sharp, punishing definition in the dark. In a moment, our journey will reach its final, deepest destination, where the mountain stream drops its boundaries entirely and dissolves into the absolute stillness of the earth. Let the weight of your canopy slide down into the floorboards, knowing that for the next few hours, your softness is the most resilient thing you possess. The freezing wind that rattled through the dry ferns of the gorge has dropped its voice completely now, leaving the dark mountain ridge in a state of absolute, unmoving clarity. Every rigid iron wire you tried to weave over the tomorrow of your life has begun to unloop, detaching itself from the banks of your mind and sliding silently into the deep, dark water. The artificial fortifications have been entirely dismantled, for the frantic artisan within you has finally set down the pliers, allowing the current of your spirit to pool in the low hollows of the valley floor, where no metrics exist and no one is coming to inspect the strength of your roof. Your breathing has become very quiet now, a slow, rhythmic softening that feels less like an intentional act and more like water slowly seeping through the microcracks of fractured slate at midnight. With each long, unhurried release of air, your limbs are becoming heavier, sinking into the mattress, as if the clay of your body is finally remembering its connection to the cool, ancient earth that knows exactly how to shelter a root through the hardest freeze. The fine, screaming splits that you carried through the busy afternoon are closing, sealed by the absolute darkness and the thick, protective boundary of this silent room. There is nothing left to hold up, The ancient cedar beams of your inner house have been relieved of their unnatural burden, resting on a foundation that has no urgency, supporting nothing but the deep, velvety blackness of a night that has forgotten how to calculate the wind. You have been given full, unconditional permission to be entirely unmapped tonight. You do not need to keep watch over the shifting shale of the high cliffs, and you do not need to ensure that your safety is completely guaranteed before the sun rises over the ridge. The willow whip is deep beneath the frozen spray, and the entire northern gorge is sleeping under a heavy, seamless blanket of grey shadow. Let your chest widen into the cool air one final time, feeling the immense, unburdened luxury of a space that is completely unobserved, unmeasured, and exempt from the requirement to produce a single rigid defense for anyone else. The obligations of your next month have been released from your fingers. The timelines you feared have been dropped into the river sand. The roles you played to maintain a pleasant smile while carrying a heavy stone have been unbuckled and left on the slippery trail. You are allowed to stop surviving the world's anticipation for tonight. You are allowed to return to the deep, fluid stillness that existed before you ever learned how to turn your fear into an identity. The bed beneath you is completely steady, a solid foundation of ancient rock and dark loam that requires no bracing or engineering from your tired brain. Let the truths you have heard tonight sink past your analytical thoughts, past your self-judgments, down into the deepest marrow of your bones, turning into a warm, heavy resilience that will keep your core intact without requiring a single wall. The night is wide, the earth is cold, and your unique nature is entirely valid in its willingness to bend with the flow. As the final embers of your vigilance turn to cool ash, the image of Master Taizan and the young stonemason Koi dissolves entirely into the dark wool of your room. The quarry is gone, the iron mallet is gone, and the heavy slate canopy has vanished into the evening mist. There is only this mattress, this rising chest, and the vast, burdened spaciousness of a spirit that has finally stopped trying to force tomorrow to stay still. Sleep is not a destination you must earn by building a flawless fortress. It is simply the natural yielding of the branch when the darkness becomes total. Let the night fold over you like cold mountain water over a supple green reed. And as you drift into that deep, undisturbed stillness where no calculations can reach you, let your heart rest in the absolute safety of its own unwritten nature, knowing that the river has never required your iron net to find its way home. What if the tomorrow you have been spending your life trying to conquer is waiting to receive you not as a judge, but as a deep pool that already knows how to cradle your weight the moment you stop fighting the fall? Or the cold darkness expands from that question, filling the crevices of your room like slow water, finding the low hollows of an ancient stone wall. It is a stillness that does not urge your mind to produce an answer, nor does it look for an intellectual resolution to the years you spent running. It simply hovers around your shoulders, thick and heavy, allowing the frantic architecture of your fears to lose its remaining density. The image of the north-facing cliff remains with you. In the quiet, a vast, dark shelter where the earth does not apologize for its shadows. In that cleft, the soil does not strive to become sunlit before its time. It does not look across the chasm to see if the southern terrace has a better name, or if the golden stalks are receiving more praise from the passing merchants. It rests completely in its own chilly moisture, unhurried, silent, and perfectly continuous with its own winter nature. You can feel the luxury of that unhurried ground as your weight settles deeper into the fabric of your bed. There is a soft, unfolding space in the center of your lower belly, a complete release of that tight, hidden anchor that usually keeps your nervous system vibrating with the speed of the world. That tightness was the physical shape of your anxiety, the muscle memory of a stream trying to force itself over an impossible ridge to prove it isn't late. But tonight, the ridge has vanished. The mattress beneath your limbs is entirely steady, absorbing your fatigue without requiring you to justify your placement on the earth. You can let go of the perimeter of your achievements. You can let go of the invisible yardstick you have been using to measure the depth of your own life. In the quietest currents of the awakened mind, we are reminded that our true nature is not the rigid bamboo pipe that fractures under pressure, but the fluid, adaptive water inside that knows how to find the lowest, darkest hollow and rest there without shame. The pipe may crack, it may rot in the mud, and it may fail to reach the high fields where the artificial garden was planned. But the water itself remains permanently unhurt, completely unchanged by the speed of its flow or the height of the terrace it touches. Tonight, you are returning to that water. You are moving your sense of self away from the fragile, brittle tubes of status, age, and public arrival, and you are resting as the deep, dark current that flows beneath the ice. Let your breath become even quieter now, a faint, almost invisible tide that moves through your body like the slow seeping of winter moisture through a cedar root. You do not need to pull the air in with a sense of urgency, and you do not need to push it out as if you are running out of time. The body knows exactly how to navigate its own internal seasons, just as the mountain knows how to hold the snow and the wild iris seed knows how to sit in the black mud for months without losing its core. There is absolutely nothing for you to calculate in this room. The peers who occupied your thoughts during the day are sleeping under their own roofs, surrounded by their own private trials, dealing with the unique conditions of their own ground. Your anxiety cannot speed up their dawn, and your self-condemnation cannot heal your own delay. You can let them have their gold while you claim your shadow. Imagine the bitter, black seed of the iris one last time, not as a symbol outside of yourself, but as the very density of your heart tonight. Its hull is so thick, so completely hardened by the cold wisdom of this mountain, that even the sharpest sting of someone else's success cannot pierce its boundary. The gold across the valley may shine. It may illuminate the entire southern ridge, but it cannot make this seed rot. It cannot force an early blossom that would wither in the winter air. When the true season arrives, the shell will crack from within, naturally, quietly, according to its own organic rhythm, leaving you whole, rooted, and beautifully aligned with your own ground. You do not need to mimic the blossom of the cherry tree to know the power of your own root. The house around you has dropped its last daytime echo now, the distant sounds of the streets fading into a soft, uniform blanket of quiet that matches the slow thrumming of your pulse. Your tongue is soft against the floor of your mouth. Your throat is entirely relaxed, and your eyelids are resting with a heavy, leaden weight, no longer searching the dark for a sign of where you stand. The future is an unformed landscape that does not require your mapping. Tonight, the past is a fallen leaf that cannot be greened again by your sleeplessness. Both are completely irrelevant to the immediate dark reality of this cold air moving through your frame. Let yourself sink an inch further into the dark, feeling the immense relief of being entirely left behind by the world's clocks. No one is tracking your arrival here. No one is comparing your score. No one is evaluating your timeline. And no one is demanding that you explain why your fields are still bare. You are completely anonymous in this winter. Your value has returned to its natural, unearned state, the same silent worth of a boulder leaning over a creek or a flake of frost settling onto the black muck of the cliff as the final embers of your resistance turn to cool ash. The image of Master Taizan and the young builder Koi dissolves entirely into the dark wool of your room. The terrace is gone, the iron hoe is gone, and the split bamboo pipe has vanished into the grey fog. There is only this mattress, this rising chest, and the vast, unburdened spaciousness of a spirit that has finally stopped trying to force its own spring. Sleep is not a destination you must earn through a day of perfect progress. It is simply the natural closing of the seed. When the darkness becomes total, let the night fold over you like wet earth over a resting root. And as you drift into that deep, undisturbed stillness where no metrics exist, let this one final truth rest against your chest. You were never meant to be a uniform crop, growing on a predictable slope. You were only ever meant to be the deep, patient earth that knows how to winter its own holiness. What if the tomorrow you have been spending your life trying to conquer is waiting to receive you not as a judge, but as a deep pool that already knows how to cradle your weight the moment you stop fighting the fall? The stillness that follows. That question is not a hollow or empty vacuum, but a vast, heavy quiet that spreads out to touch every corner of your sleeping room. It is the exact texture of an ancient forest floor in the dead of winter, where the fallen leaves have turned to rich, dark compost. And the earth beneath is silently, slowly absorbing the autumn rains into its deep, secret heart. You can feel that same steady absorption occurring within your own awareness right now. The sharp, frantic signals of the day, the mental tabulations, the digital echoes, the calculations of how much faster you must run. Tomorrow are all being pulled down into the heavy loam of your physical frame, losing their electrical sting, turning into a soft, uniform weight that presses you gently into the center of the bed. We have lived for so long under the exhausting illusion that our life is a single, narrow path, where everyone is running toward the same crowded finish line. We have allowed ourselves to believe that if we do not reach a specific coordinate by a certain year, we have somehow squandered our potential or been excluded from the warmth of the valley. But as you lie here in the dark, the deep, unhurried truth of our interconnected world begins to wash over your tired chest like a cool mountain stream finding its natural level. It reminds you that the trees on the northern slope do not spend their winters weeping, because the valleys below are already green. They do not force their sap to rise through the ice just to prove they are alive. They know that their late blossom is not a mistake. It is the natural, beautiful consequence of their specific ground. Think of how much energy it has taken to constantly defend your timeline, to pretend that you are perfectly content, when your inner current is foaming with anxiety, or to try to stretch your natural capacity until your nerves are frayed like old hemp rope. That performance is what splits the bamboo of your spirit. That is the internal friction that tears the delicate lining of your peace. But tonight, there is no requirement to perform. There is no one asking you to be successful, or fast, or settled. You are allowed to be completely unformed in the dark. You are allowed to let the cracks in your plans remain wide open, because the darkness of this night does not want to inspect your progress. It simply wants to wrap its cool, dark cloth around your weariness until the heat of your horizontal race has completely died away. Let your attention rest for a moment in the very palms of your hands, noticing the subtle, cool space between your fingers. These are the hands that have reached for reassurance, that have held the heavy iron tools of your daily labor, and that have scrolled through the endless, glowing notices of other people's arrivals. They have been active, gripped, and busy for hours, trying to construct a fortress of security out of an unpredictable world. Notice how they feel when they are completely empty, resting flat on the sheets with the fingers slightly curved and relaxed. They are holding absolutely nothing. They are not grasping at a single person's approval. They are not trying to adjust a single milestone. On your calendar, they are as soft and neutral as two stones, resting at the bottom of a deep, unmoving well. As your hands soften, let that same quality of absolute surrender travel up through your wrists, your forearms, and settle into the heavy, wide slope of your shoulders. The raw bruising left by the invisible yoke of comparison is beginning to cool. The phantom weight of the neighbor's harvest is gone. You do not have to carry the water across the unnatural ridges tonight. The mountain is at peace, the terrace is dark, and the winter gates are closed against the rising wind. The world is perfectly capable of turning on its axis without your supervision, and your peers can navigate their own paths while you drop into the dark mud of your own rest. Consider the immense, quiet sanity of the wild seeds that Master Taizan buried under the frost. They did not survive the winter by striving to reach the light early, or by complaining about the thick, hard texture of their hulls. They survived because they trusted the cold. When the heavy, freezing thoughts of your own delays strike your mind tomorrow, you do not need to build an aggressive wall of defense or throw yourself into a frantic panic to catch up. You can simply allow your inner landscape to become spacious and hollow like the dark cleft in the cliff. Let the successes of others enter your awareness and pass straight through without leaving a single trace of envy on the mirror of your soul. You can be the dark ground that allows all things to grow in their own time, remaining completely unmoving and whole at the center of your life. The air in your bedroom seems to grow cooler, more protective, wrapping around your face like a soft, dark silk that has been washed in mountain water. The rhythm of your heart has settled into a deep, slow thud, a steady and comforting beat that has been keeping time for your life since before you had a name or a destination. It does not ask for your opinion on whether you are successful. It does not require you to achieve a specific status before it keeps you alive. It functions perfectly well in the deep, dark chamber of your chest, entirely independent of your social comparisons and your midnight fears. You can trust its rhythm. You can trust the deep intelligence of your nature to repair your spirit while you are away in the dark. Let go of the need to have a clear blueprint for your next decade. You do not need to figure out how you will catch up or how you will explain your delay to the people who expect more from you. or how you will navigate the complex demands of the upcoming season. Those choices do not belong to the midnight hours. They belong to the light. And when the light arrives, the clarity you need will emerge naturally from the reservoir of this deep rest. To try to fix your life while your spirit is exhausted is like trying to clear a muddy pool. By stirring the water with a stick, you must let the movement stop first. You must let the sediment settle to the bottom until the liquid becomes perfectly clear and still. Feel the heavy, soothing drag of sleep, pulling at the very edges of your awareness now, like a slow tide gathering up the loose gravel on the shoreline of a dark lake. The words you are hearing are no longer concepts to be analyzed. They are simply a low, rhythmic frequency that is gently rocking the hull of your resting body. The bed beneath you is completely safe. The darkness around you is deep, wide, and completely supportive. It holds your weight without asking for a single word of justification. It does not care about your productivity, your age, or your arrivals. It simply carries you because you are a part of this earth. Let your consciousness dissolve entirely into that supportive depth. You are returning to the ancient, subterranean well where all individual streams find their rest. You are sliding past the layers of grey stone, past the frozen roots of the cedar trees, down into the pristine, untouched stillness of the deep ground. In that space, there is no leader, there is no follower, and there is no race. There is only the boundless, dark peace of a spirit that has finally remembered how to be completely still within its own skin. And as the last trace of the waking world fades into the winter fog, let your heart rest in the absolute safety of its own unhurried nature, knowing that nothing you survive today has the power to diminish the pristine, beautiful truth of your unique timing. What if the emptiness you have been running from was never a sign of failure, but the wide, open valley where your soul finally learns how to rest without asking for permission from the world?